based on our info and their info. And whoever figured it out will get a gold star. Gold star. I like gold stars. Okay, so you should find the zip file there, and there's more than one project. The one I opened first is this data provider factory. It is before the pages I told you guys to look at. But since we're all together, let's take a look at it anyways. Now I've got it open. Let me get it in a way where you can see what it's got. And let me tell you about a little bit about what this one is supposed to do.
I'd say that the project target framework is not installed.
Yeah, I just put through correctly.
Yeah, do that, whatever, when it revert or whatever it does, because it seems to be okay. Yeah.
I hope it does.
Okay, so this one is, they call it their data factory provider. And the factory model is a programming model that says we can produce objects repeatedly, like over and over and over. And where a factory model comes into play a lot is like in games where you have characters that continually spawn, and that would be a character factory or an enemy factory or something like that. In our example here, our factory is that we're going to allow connections to databases, different providers, be it SQL Server or Access or whatever other database management system we want to connect to, without having to change our source code. And so that's why this one is considered a factory. So let's take a look at the source code we do have. It's not got a lot in the program.cs file. This thing claims that it's fun with data provider factories. Now, if I try to run it right now, it's going to crash because I haven't set up the connection information for how to connect to our database in this application. So we're going to have to fix that before we can run it. But if you look at it, it creates a string to hold the data provider, and then it goes to configuration manager, which is a class a lot like our resource manager class that we've interacted with a little bit to get resources out of our resource manager. Configuration manager lets us access configuration files. And it says, I want you to find the app setting named provider, and whatever that content is, load that into the data provider string. Then for another string called our connection string, we're going to look at our configuration manager connection strings settings and find the OLEDB provider option. After we've got our connection string and provider information, we're going to establish this database provider factory, which is a special class, which is what allows us to access any database management system the same as the next one. Then we're going to create our connection using that factory and know that we're connected to the database. Now, why is this so glamorous and glorious? Because it's going to let us change from SQL Server using the SQL Server native client provider files to using SQL Server like its Access. We're going to use the online linking and embedding providers, the OLE providers, that we could get to from Microsoft Office products and all sorts of different places. So it's kind of high level, but it's letting us use the same code to connect in both of these different ways. Where in the olden days, you would have had to completely rewrite almost the whole source file to change that connection from SQL Server to an OLE type provider. Now we can use this provider factory class And we can make it kind of happen behind the scenes to our source code. So this information is going to be stored in our app.config file. So let's take a look at that. When you look at your app.config file, it's an XML file. So we've got our tags, our begin tags and our end tags. And here in our app settings section, we see our provider value. So if we want to run this application using the online linking and embedding provider, we would use this key. If we want to run it using our SQL client, we would use this key right above. I'd like to use that one first because our SQL client is our native provider. So I'd like to test with it first. So I'm going to comment out this one. And uncomment out the other one. Let's see. I'm trying to do it the same as they did. It looks like they added in another opening thing.
So just to try and summarize it, be sure I'm on the same page here. This program.cs file is in charge of reading whatever's on the server and passing it back. And this config file is in charge of telling it what server we're wanting to connect to and how.
Exactly. Very good. And so whenever we connect to different providers to get to our data, we have to supply all that information, how to log on, how to get there. So that's what we're going to do here with this connection string. So we want to make our SQL client provider be the active one. So in your app settings, comment out the OLEDB provider and uncomment this SQL client, the OLEDB, so that it looks like that. And I think that's right. This is way new stuff. Okay, that should close our app settings key. And then we want to look at our connection string. We have both connection strings active. We're saying we could either connect to our auto lot tables using the SQL provider. And if we use the SQL provider, here's our connection string. Or we could connect using this name, auto lot OLEDB provider, using this connection string here. Let's try to get one to work, okay? So here at this point, we want to make our connection string match what we need, yeah.
Because I'm noticing that the one that we downloaded doesn't have the same as what you've got on yours.
Exactly. So let me get, I'm going to Control Z a few times, try to put it back, and then I'll uncomment that again.
Do we need to give it a password or user data of any kind, or just like the server for now?
We are going to try, but we should need to give it our password. Let me get this expanded as much as I can. So we are working with our AutoLot SQL provider first. And here where it says connection string, I'm thinking that we need to keep this word local DB in the parentheses because they refer to that in the code. So I'm going to go to Canvas and find our connection string. And down here, where we have the information on connecting from Visual Studio, we're going to try to tie these two together because things are a little different. So I want to copy the data starting after the equal sign all the way to the semicolon, but I don't want to get the semicolon or the equal sign. Our long data source string, and it is really long. Now I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste it right after this slash. So now we're saying our local DB is this. Now, for our integrated security, let's leave that as true for an experiment testing here. But let's change our initial catalog to our database name. Now we know we're going to have to supply a username and password. So if we could get an error that tells us that, then we can add those parameters to our connection string. Now I've got to go back up and uncomment out my correct provider here. Get it cleaned up a little bit. And I believe we're ready to try it. Let's see what happens. Well, that's not very exciting. Character seek, where have I got it left?
You can use the comment and comment back. The closing comment.
On that one.
On line 6.
Line 6. Does it need another one?
Because it's seeing two starting ones there.
Like that?
So it wants there to be
The comment one, the dash dash. And then,
Yeah, you got to help me. I'm totally oblivious with this stuff.
and then delete the forward slash.
So helpful. Thank you, sir. Is that the only one?
Yeah, that looks better. I've gotten something
Have you gotten something?
a bit more interesting than that, but then I didn't have the weird comment issue there. On mine, it opened a console, not unlike this one. And then Visual Studio tells me on line 37 of the program CS that the system argument exception, keyword not supported provider.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
it looks like yours is doing that too, so maybe it's not so interesting. But it's a bit mysterious though. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Let's look at that XML file. I'm going to click stop here. So here's our provider key in our app settings. Is it the same? Provider. Provider. Well, being as this one is so state-of-the-art and above board, let's open one of those others and try to connect in a simpler way, and then we'll come back to this one and see if we can get it, because it's doing some pretty high-end connections there. So let's look at the AutoLot data reader. See if this one is doing things in a more reasonable way. I am going to go ahead and say change the target to the .NET framework that we have. And let's take a look at this one. Now in our program.cs, we actually have a using clause, which says, bless you, says we want to use an SQL connection. So it's actually saying in our program code which database we want to use. So we're getting away from that behind the scenes fancy stuff. We'll get back to it. And then we have our connection string right here in our code. It's still just a little bit different though than what we've been given is a connection string. So we'll see if we can correlate the two and get them to work. Let's continue looking at the code in this one though before we worry about our connection string. As soon as we set up our connection using our connection string, we open the connection. Then we actually create an SQL command. Select star from inventory. So that's going to select all of the rows from our inventory table that we created last week. Now we haven't executed that command yet. We've just prepared it. Now we're going to actually build our command object that's going to process that command. And we say, hey command, run the SQL code in the SQL string variable using the connection named connection. Now, that causes the command to be executed. Whenever well, it's really being built, and then right here, we're executing that reader command, and we're using an SQL data reader to read all the rows that resulted from our SQL command. Each row is going to be read into the My Data Reader object. And so while we have data to read, we can loop through our data reader, just outputting that information. Okay, so interesting. Let's fix up our connection string then. Well, I said last time I wanted to leave that local DB part, so I'm going to try that again. I want that long, giant connection string of ours. And I'm going to paste that. And I know I want to change the initial catalog to my database, so you guys want to use yours. As we experiment, I'm thinking that we're going to be adding in our username and password parameters. Let's just go ahead and do that. I want user ID equal username, semicolon, password equal password.
And that just goes right after the catalog bit, right?
Let's put that right after our initial catalog. And we want it to all be part of our string. So take a look at that connection string that we're passing in. We have different parameters that are available on our connection string. Our data source specifies where our database can be found.
A super dumb question. Are these spaces, how important are the spaces there? Like, do we need to be copying that exactly? Or?
I think it should be okay with the spaces. What matters is that we have a semicolon after each different parameter, and we have a parameter name that's recognized by our command object. So our command object is looking for these parameter values.
So like the space between user and ID is probably important, but not the other ones.
Right. We want our username to be our username. Yeah, and I think my password is passwords. I don't remember what I made my password. We'll see. Okay, let's try it. We know we've got our tables out there, so let's run it. Okay, it says I'm having fun with data readers, and then I'm just hanging there. Okay. Cannot open database auto lot requested by the login. So why is it trying to get to auto lot? I told it not to.
Oh, line 41.
There it is.
We have to put it there too. I wonder if it would be better to assign that to a string so that we can just
Yeah, get to it.
like assign a little string variable to whatever our server is called. And then we could just plug that variable in whenever we need to call on that name.
Yeah, that would be good. Where else do they have it? Right here. Here's our data source again. That should just be our log name. I'm not seeing. Just go ahead and change your initial catalog here to your name too. And let's change that connection string to that long name. I agree that we need a variable for that.
It'll be fine for now. I
For
suppose.
now, yeah, let's just try to get it to work.
Good to know for the future though.
And I'm just replacing the part after the slash. Now, if we're going to use this format, again, we're going to need to add in our login and password information. And those parameters were user space ID. Trying to help me. And password.
I know how to type. There we go.
I've got to get rid of the space though on this one, don't I? SUL connection string builder does not contain a definition for user ID.
Wasn't IDE?
Capital I, capital D.
Capital I N D.
Yeah. That.
Awesome.
These have to be commas, not semicolons. That's
Right.
unusual.
And so this one is because we're using this really interesting var data type, and we're saying we're going to build a new string builder. And so we're supplying all of the parameters that are available to the string builder within the open and closing curly braces of this var data type. So it's like parameters that are named,
Oh,
but it's a very
that's
nice
why.
syntax.
We're passing in parameters, not
Mhm.
just declaring variables.
Right.
These are actually separate lines, quote unquote. That's why the commas. Okay.
Okay, are we better? We found it in both places. Again, I'm kind of hanging, so I'm not thinking it's too perfect.
I mean, it's not giving us errors. Maybe it just needs a minute.
Yeah, it takes a while and it will crash. It has to communicate with the database. So if it doesn't communicate right away, it probably will.
Yeah, it keeps trying.
Crash after a while. Which is really frustrating.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay, so the server was not found or was not accessible. Verify that the instance name is correct and the SQL server is configured to allow remote connections. So, does anyone have a laptop that we could try
All the
a
data
hotspot?
to not bring mine.
I didn't bring mine
The one
either.
time I didn't bring mine.
Do you have yours?
Mine's working right now. I have a
Huh?
Mine's working right now, and it's from the zip file.
Oh, good. Show us what you got. Let me unconnect. I would rather do that.
So what's the big difference here?
What's he
What I shared, or what
done?
I changed is I took out the connection stuff in the string builder. It's like the timeout and the
the other thing.
The timeout and the security.
Yeah, I took those out. And mine doesn't have the local DB in front of it, and I use this @ symbol, which they use in the book. I'm not sure why.
The @ symbol is just going to be absolute string, just like it was before. We're looking at such weird code, everything looks different, but it'll be absolute string. So that one's letting you connect. I wonder if you put in that local DB parameter again, that name, does it,
You go like in front of it.
or put it before the @ sign, like parenthesis, local DB, and then slash.
Because ours, it's.
Does that mess
after
it up?
that symbol. It's included in the parentheses.
It's part of the string.
Or not the
Yeah,
parentheses, but-
I'm not exactly sure how they're naming it there. Okay, so make yours like Joe. What does your one up above look like? Did you change it?
No, I didn't change that one.
So just this string builder one down here? Okay.
So I'm actually running line from like the zip file and it's not crashing, so I don't know if that means it's working.
Are you getting output? Because you should get, you should see,
It's because the other connection's not upstairs.
yeah.
It's not allowed.
So you should see some output if it's working. Okay, so I'm going to change that. Do, 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 do. Okay,
So
I'm going to comment those out so you guys know which ones are gone. Our data source took out the local.
So a bit randomly, but is this perhaps one of those cases where it's legitimate for a programmer to just be goofing off? Because I'm noticing it's starting to take a minute for it to do things now, which we're not quite used to. But I imagine that happens a lot when you're actually out in the industry and you might have God only knows how many things to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And when you have new things like this that you're testing, you know, sometimes you just have some time that you don't make visible progress, but you're making a lot of progress, learning things.
And so you end up goofing off while you're waiting on it to compile or run or whatever.
Awesome. It's working.
That feels promising.
Woohoo, we got stuff.
No. Mine doesn't do it.
Yours doesn't do it?
Can you move your window
Yep.
console out of the way so I can? Okay. I will try one more time because mine still has the local bit on there.
It doesn't seem to care about this last comma,
Oh, hey,
which is weird.
it finally worked. It was
Did it
super
work?
snappy this time. That's weird.
Is everybody's working? Woohoo!
Huh.
Okay, good job. Now, let's look again at some of this code that's going on here. In our program, we saw that we're going to be opening an SQL data reader. And in Canvas, let me show you this. I have this document, the data provider flowchart, and I'm going to go ahead and print a few copies. And what this is just a way for us to keep track of what connections we have and how we connect things to the database. So let me see if I can get this downloaded and print a few. And I want to fill it out while we're talking about this.
Do you want us to print this out too, or you?
No, I'll send a bunch of copies to the back printer.
Yeah, that it'll probably like that more than all of us trying to tell it to do that.
I think so. And then it kind of helps me to clarify what we have going on and what's connected to what. Yeah, students do if they're worth that much trouble. Okay, so in this flow chart, I just want to illustrate how we make these connections from the database to our graphical user interface down at the bottom. So up at the top, we have our database. And if you want to, you could write something beside that, you know, like your username, because that's really what your database is your username. And we know everybody kind of uses the term database and tables synonymously. So a database is just a bunch of tables. So sometimes people can even think of just one table as a database. So it's okay for you to think of those things as the same thing, really. All right, so we have our database up at the top, and then for our database, we need a connection. Well, right here in our using clause, we are creating that connection. Our connection for this program, if you want to add it to your flow chart, is named connection. That's what we named it.
That's the second one. from
The
top.
second one from the top, right, our connection string. Now, if you look at that connection, if you want to make additional notes on your flow chart, the important things to me are a connection has to have a connection string. That's what tells it how to get to the database so that it knows where it is and how to log on. And our connection has to be opened. Now, with this using clause, this tells C# to open this connection, create this connection object, basically, and use this connection object through all of the code that's part of the using clause down to its closing curly brace. And then when that using clause is over, it'll automatically release all those resources. So our connection will be closed. All that will happen automatically without us having to do it. If we didn't have the connection object enclosed in this using clause, we would have to close it manually, or else we would leave resources open, memory leaks, right? Plus, we could leave the locks on our database that keep people from being able to update things.
So TLDR, much like with XML files and stuff, be sure to close it when you're done.
Yep, or use the using. Now, after we've got our connection string open, we start building our command object. If you look at your flow chart, that's the next thing down. So we called our command object my command. And then if you wanted to make some notes about the command has the SQL string. So it knows what SQL we're going to issue to the database. What is our command? That's why it's called command. So one place that can be a real problem for programmers to debug is that command string. If I have a typo in my SQL code here, my SQL code, I'm just not going to get any results back. I'm not going to get any errors. I'm not going to really necessarily get anything. It's just not going to work. Because it's just a string, the C# compiler will let you put anything in there. And if it's not a valid command, you're not going to get anything back.
So it would be best to write up your query in the server manager first so that you can confirm that it works correctly first.
Yes.
And then plug it in.
And copy and paste it as much as possible. Use that absolute string,
Yeah.
whatever.
Hear me out here. This is going to sound kind of weird. But I wonder if you couldn't use a file reader command to just pull it out of the SQL file directly instead of copying and pasting it. And then that way, if you need to update it, you could just go into that SQL file, update it, test it to make sure it works, and then you know it'll work everywhere you're calling that query.
And that's a really good idea. And what people do is set up stored procedures. And then we can just execute our stored procedure that has all the SQL code in it that we need. And so it kind of takes that external file and brings it into the database so that we have everything that we need in the database. But that's exactly what they're trying to do with those stored procedures, is
Okay,
make it to
just
where
A,
it's
keep
saved.
it consistent and easy to update, and B, I very definitely know that this works because
Exactly.
if it didn't work, it wouldn't be here. They'd
And
still be
I've
working
tested
on
it and use it in other places and all those things that make it be valuable. All right, so that was our command object. Now, we need to make that command execute and get the results back from it. So the next thing on our flow chart says data adapter or data reader. In this case, we're using a data reader. And our data reader is called my data reader. Whenever we, again, setting up our data reader, we use a using command. So a reader is another object that has to be opened and closed as part of our code, or we have to use a using, or else we'll leave those resources out there open. Now in our reader, we're going to loop through this data set basically and read all of the things that are in it. Now those last two boxes that are on this flow chart have to do with connecting that output from SQL to a form. Because if I had a form, I could create a data grid object on that form and just associate it with this data reader, and then all of the data would automatically display on my form. So we'll look at that and we can get to it. But right now we'll stay with these beautiful console apps. Mm-hmm.
Realistically, we don't even have to do that. You know, this is the part where we're actually assigning the data to something. We can assign it
Exactly.
to whatever we want. We can
So-
assign it to a list of objects or a list of, or just a regular list, or we can do whatever we want with it at that point, realistically.
In our data
Just put
reader,
it wherever it happens to be the most convenient.
exactly. In our data reader then, to access our individual columns in our table, this is how we're doing it. So we're outputting the literal make, and then we're going to our data reader and saying, find the column named make. So right here within these square brackets and the double quotes, our column name has to match our table definition exactly for us to find that data. So here's our make column. Here's our pet name column that we want to get from each row out of our database or our table. Our color. So there's all of those different things that we had set up in our table. So we can access the individual column for each row. Okay, so the way this thing works, it starts out using a string builder, a connection string builder, to build that connection string for us. Then it opens its connection. And then reads through all of our different makes and models. Now let's make some errors. Everybody's is working, right? We all good? Let's make some errors so we can see what happens if something goes wrong. We have a lot of different layers now. Look at your flow chart. Those are all different layers and different classes that are involved in this connection. So we have a lot of different places where things can go wrong. So first of all, we've seen what happens if our connection is no good. We have a problem with that. We just kind of hang for a little while.
And
Now,
tell us that we either got the wrong login information, or maybe we just don't have permission to use that.
it could be something else. Let's try it. Mess up your password, make it wrong, and then run. And let's see if it can tell you about that. My login failed. So that's pretty specific. I'm going to stop running and fix that.
it's somebody who doesn't exist. Does that-
Now, if you've got your server name wrong, it should be something like we were getting at first about the server not being found. It could also be your server is down. So that's why I was immediately, do we have somebody who can use a hotspot so that we could check to see if we could access the server outside of our network, because we know there's security constraints put on our network about accessing our servers. So that's the first thing I'm like, oh no. So let's try it, messing up our server name. I'll just get rid of the S here at the beginning and run. See what kind of error.
An identical server?
Yeah, you've probably done.
Probably not.
It sits there for a while. It's doing its hang thing. So it's retrying, trying to connect a connection. And after the 10,000 tries or whatever it gives, it comes back and says no such host is known. So it's doing pretty good on its errors.
So that's what the different errors between connection and database might look like. then.
I'm going to put my S back. So what if our select statement is messed up? Which select statements are we running here? It's like
Do the one under main, because there's actually 3 different ones here, but the one it seems to be using is this main one.
this main one. So
Kind
let's
of
mess them
middle.
up. Okay, so we're actually doing 2 select statements, selecting from inventory and selecting from customers. I'm going to run this and make sure that I see that and that I haven't messed anything up. So yeah, here's inventory things, car IDs, and then here's customers. So it ran both of those select statements. So let's just mess one up. What if I have the first select statement messed up, but not the second one? So I just have the table name wrong. Let's try it.
It doesn't like that at all.
Now again, it's kind of hanging, right? It's trying.
I mean, mine was pretty snappy about it.
Yours just crashed right away.
Well, I mean, it hasn't crashed, but it has told me on Visual Studio.
Oh, look,
this
invalid
table isn't-
object name
this table isn't a thing.
inventory. That is so much better than it used to be. Awesome.
Like,
Okay,
it
so I'm going to
wants
fix that.
crash.
I'll let it crash finally. So very good. It's going to help you a lot more than it used to. So do look at the messages you're getting, because that's just great.
It's the second one.
Okay, let's save all this because we have some great stuff here with our connection strings. Let's go to the next one.
An interesting note I'd like to make before we I decided to see what would happen if we messed up the second SQL command. In which case it'll load the first stuff fine, and then it'll stop and say, hey, this other table that you want doesn't exist. So like,
Oh,
on
that
my
is so
console,
great.
I've got all the cars, but it won't load the customers because I changed the name of customers, and it's like, that table's not there. What do you want me to do?
That is so
So
great.
that's an interesting distinction. Depending on which one is wrong, sometimes it'll try and load the first ones, and then it'll stop and be mad as soon as you get to the ones where it doesn't.
Cool. I'm glad it's telling us. Okay, I want to try AutoLot DAL. This is the big one. In this application,
Once it opens.
if it ever opens, yeah, you're going to see that they're doing all of the maintenance to the database and even a few other things that they add in the chapter. So this application is what they call a CRUD application, create, read, update, delete. So it does all of those things to our database tables. So it's a really nice, full-featured app. Bless you. So let's take a look at what's going on, but I want to start not in our main. First of all, let's look at Solution Explorer. In Solution Explorer, if you notice, we have two projects.
That's
We have our AutoLot client and our AutoLot DAL.
What is the AL?
We'll look. Now, in our DAL, we have 3 different folders. The bulk import folder is for the very end of the chapter. They show you how to do some bulk data movements, you know, load tables with a bunch of data. So we'll look at that. The data operations folder has our inventory DAL, which I think they're calling data access language. And then our models has our car class. So let's start with our car class. Our car class is a class just like we would have created already. It identifies a car or defines a car. And remember, with our car, we had the car ID, color, make, and pet name. And so these are the columns that we have on that inventory table. So remember, our car class matches our inventory table. That's not really recommended. We'd really rather have an inventory class match that inventory table. But I think the textbook wants to show you that it's not a law that those names match up, that you can have them differently. So remember that. Now, in this class, notice we don't have much, do we? Just some properties. So just enough so that we can access the different columns of our table. Now I'm going to look at the inventory dal.cs file. Whenever we started on our DLL chapter a month or 2 ago, early on we were talking about creating applications that had different layers so that we would have our user experience layer, our business models, and our data access layer. Well, that's what's going on in this application. The inventory DAL actually stands for data access layer. So all of the code that accesses our database is going to be put in this data access layer class. So let's see how they've done it. We have our connection string and our SQL connection set up as class level variables so that we could access them throughout all of the modules in our class. We have a really interesting constructor here. Our constructor for our inventory DAL is taking all of the parameters from our connection. So we'll see how that works. It's overloaded. It has the connection string. It sets up all of our connection information. We're going to set it up in debugger so we can step through it. Then it opens our connection. It has a special method to do that. It has a special method to close the connection. It has a special method to select all of our inventory rows from our inventory table. And in this method, it actually does the code that we were looking at earlier in that console app. It says, oh, take the results of that select statement, all of our inventory, and create car objects from each of those. Those car objects are going to be in a list, and we're going to return that list of car objects from this method. So if somebody wants to get all of the cars, they can say get all inventory, and get all inventory will return a list of all of the car objects it finds in our database table. Now, if you look at that get all inventory method, you'll notice that it actually calls like the data reader close. Now we have another method that gets one specific car. In our method that gets one specific car, we have a parameter of the ID of which car is desired. So we're going to execute a select statement with a where clause to get that car by ID. Our data reader then should only have one row, and we're going to make that one row into a car object and return it. Now we even have code here to insert a new car into our inventory. Notice how they've got that SQL statement set up. They're using our $sign method, that parameter replacement, to make it nice and clear like we would want to. So in the insert auto, we open a connection, we set up our SQL, we do our SQL command. Now this SQL command is a little bit different. We have to say execute non-query is our method, because we're not querying with a select statement. We're using an insert. So we have to use a special method. Now we can insert what's this one do? This inserts a whole bunch of cars for us. Insert auto. And then we have our delete and updates. So as you look at this, it's a little overwhelming at first. So that's why it's so important to go through that chapter, doing the reading as you're looking at the different methods so that you get a really good feeling about it, because we don't want it to be something that you stay away from. We want it to be something that you learn. So you got to jump in there and really get started working on it and making it feel like, well, this isn't any big deal. So let's make this thing work. We're going to start out by finding our connection string, right? Here it is. Let's fix it. I want to find my long string from Canvas. And I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to put it right there. And I think somewhere it's going to cause us trouble, but we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, so we got rid of the integrated security to make things work. We said our initial catalog was our database. We added our user ID. So I'm going to put a semicolon and then user ID.
Is it
Should I make it?
lower D or upper
That's
upper
what
D?
I'm not sure. Let's see.
Okay.
According to this one, it's lower, but we could have to change it. Okay, I think I've got everything. Got our long server name. I'm missing something that's mad at me.
Why is it not like the semicolon? But it doesn't like not having it either. That's weird. Oh.
Where is it?
You've got your quote on the outside.
Oh, okay, I see.
Instead of the inside.
Thank you. And then we don't have a semicolon because this is actually a parameter within our parentheses that I missed. So I overwrote our parentheses. Now, is that enough? I'm going to try it. Let's run it.
No.
Okay, so we have to go see what's going on with our program.cs. And it has a main, so we should be able to run it. Being mean, so I know there was an option to run it without,
I think you can set the auto lock client as a startup project.
yeah, but you should just be able to run it. I wonder why they have this other one set is probably from that bulk import. So I think that's the best. Let's right click on your auto lock client and set a startup project. And then we should be able to run it.
Much better.
Okay, so first it's listing all of the cars that we have from that list all cars method. And then it's doing some stuff before it crashes. It's this bulk copy that it doesn't like. I'm okay with that. So let's see where we are. I'm going to stop running and I want to go to our program.cs in our auto lock client. And let's set a breakpoint right here where it prints out that all cars heading. Or do you want to see it instantiate this inventory data access? Let's do that. I'm going to move that breakpoint up to line 17. Check your debug settings, debug options, and where we have this option step over properties and operators, make sure that's unchecked so that it does not step over, because we want to see those properties and operators get executed. And then let's run. Now, my screen is just black console screen, and I've got the breakpoint here at the instantiation of our inventory data access layer. So we're creating our new data access layer. I'm going to go ahead and step into to see it instantiate that class. It starts out with our method that includes our connection string. Which calls the method that wants the connection string as a parameter and sets up our connection string. Now, notice this code here too, that we have a method, inventory data access layer, that has the lambda expression instead of having opening and closing curly braces. Can you do that? Is that legal? Showing you lots of stuff here, huh? Yes, you can. So if you only have one line of code in the method, you can do the lambda expression and have your one line of code in your method. Okay, so I'm going to continue then, looking at all this C sharpness. It finishes and comes back finally to my program.cs. Now it creates a list by getting all of our inventory. So now we're going to be using that data access layer. We're going to be using that get all inventory method. So let's follow it. It opens the connection. That worked. Then it creates our list, sets up our string. Now we're setting up our command object. And we executed our reader. And in this example, they told the reader to go ahead and close its connection after it was done. But while there are rows, we're going to read them. And for each row, we're going to add a new car object. You should be able to look down at your locals screen and see what is in the reader, what's in your command object, and your different car objects.
And it seems to be really goes in okay. It tells that you a little bit.
Setting up all of your different properties and going through. So we can see it's just looping through that read. For every row from our table, it's adding a new car.
Until eventually it's not.
Right, so I'm gonna stop because it keeps doing the same thing over and over because we've got our new car. Alrighty, so we are getting there. Now, as you go through and look at the textbook, reading through that chapter, it's really gonna help you a lot with understanding things. The first time you look at this stuff, it should be pretty overwhelming. The second time, pieces start coming together. The third time, it starts making a little bit of sense. The fourth, fifth time, you start really putting the pieces together. Now, don't tell yourself that you don't have time, because you do. Because this is really important stuff. And learning how to access the database tables is going to be the same kind of concepts no matter what languages you're using. But with C# we do have a lot of classes that try to make it a little easier for us. Questions? None? Got it? Tell me your thoughts then.
Those thoughts are going a little too fast.
That's okay. So I guess the big thing is, you know, don't give yourself a chance to learn it, because this is a critical juncture. You know, it really is, because it can be quite overwhelming. So just remember, it can be overwhelming. It's not you. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that you have to give yourself a chance to learn it. We were talking before everybody got here about how people have a limited capacity to learn, right? I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but one time I taught a PC maintenance class in the summer, and they said, well, you teach PC maintenance all year, and you have these students, like, I don't know, 60 hours altogether or something like that. So we're going to do this 4 weeks in a row. You're going to have these people 8 hours a day. They're all at-risk youth who, you know, just got out of jail or a hospital or something like that. And you're going to teach them PC maintenance. These people were really motivated. They were in trouble, and they were getting paid to come to class. So they wanted to be there really bad. They were trying really hard. But after about 4 hours of learning brand new concepts, they started not being able to really absorb anymore for a day. There has to be a point where you give your brain a chance to say, here's your time to absorb that. And so we just kind of tried to adjust our schedule a little bit so that towards the afternoon, we always worked on labs and worked on reinforcing those concepts instead of trying to learn new things, because it's just impossible, because our brains can only learn so much in a certain amount of time. So this is the kind of stuff where you have to read through it. You've got to. And when you need to take a break, you need to get up and take a break. And you need to not spend a lot of time beating yourself up. Does that make sense? I see students do that a lot, where they start, I can't get this. I don't understand. I've got, you know, this is going to be too much for me. I can't do it. Don't waste your time in those thoughts. Those thoughts are not helping. Try to take a deep breath Let's go back to looking at it.
On the topic of looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
for the purpose of just learning and experimenting, I assume that I tend to go with the assumption that the simplest one is probably the best one to model off of. And you've got these 4 different folders.
Mm-hmm.
Which one of those would you say is the simplest one for the purpose of just looking at it and understanding how it works? and
That
playing with it?
reader one the reader one. So if you look at all of those projects, the auto lot data reader,
This second.
it's the second one, yeah.
That's the one to definitely look
Mhm.
at for the purpose of just experimenting.
Right, and in our videos on YouTube, the videos that are on YouTube do the same thing as this one, but with a forms-based application. And I wanted you to go through this one in your textbook so that you would have a reference. But I think the ones in the videos might be a little bit more approachable. Oh, there they are. So for chapter 21, there's overview and walkthroughs. That is a bunch of different videos. So the big difference is that in these videos, you'll create a little access table instead of using SQL Server. But it's all good practice. So just try to remember we're going to do this for several weeks. So we're not going to be, doing this today and then we're done. We're going to be talking about doing database access for quite some time to where it's going to become second nature to you. It really will. It's not going to be second nature today.
It kind of needs to be second nature. Like I'm pretty sure that this is the point where if it becomes second nature, you kind of just ascend to godhood almost.
Then you get the good jobs. Exactly.
This is the part that lets you do the really powerful things. I think.
It is, and so look at the way the textbook does some different syntax. Is a great opportunity to figure out the differences, because it's just like if you've got one job, you had one job for 2 or 3 years, and you move to another one, they would do things a little bit differently. It might still be C#, but it might look enough different that you have to step back and really take a moment to kind of think about it. So, like I said, give yourself a moment. Our assignments, if you take a look at them, should be totally doable. Now, this one was due last night, your employee base. Now, if you didn't get it turned in, you need to get it turned in. You'll get docked a little bit for being late, but it's too important for you to pass up because you're going to build on this project. So remember, for this one, you are not supposed to have a full working application. You're only supposed to have a table defined on your SQL server and an employee class that matches up with that table.
On the UML there, you said add private variables, public properties as outlined in the UML. The UML had public properties and protected. Do you want us to do that?
Let's see. Oh yeah, when you look at this UML, a lot of times you're going to have to kind of take some liberties and decide. And you might make a note in your code, a comment or something, that this was something that you weren't sure of from the UML, because it is like from a meeting and kind of not really perfect. So
I looked up the plus is public, the minus is private, and the hash was protected.
so I'd put a note in there for it. Good job.
And then on mine, you said not that we don't need a full application yet, just classes. I ended up
Just
making
classes.
a simple Windows form just to make sure the classes were working correctly. I assume that sort of thing is fine.
That's perfect too. That's fine.
It's
I just don't want you to feel overwhelmed by it, because these assignments are really, really geared to try to step us through learning all this database stuff. So this first one doesn't want you to know all that stuff yet. Just go create the table and create a class that matches it. That's all. So you don't have to be creating this giant thing that we just looked at. We're going to be working towards that. So that'll work. That'll work. So make sure you get that one done. If you haven't, like I said, we'll dock you, but we want to make sure everybody's working on this one. Now, for this week coming up, we do have a new one. And this one, right now, it says it's due a week from today. So since I was sick Monday, we might have to reevaluate that due date. So just remember, we're going to be looking at that. So what we want to look at is family table with selection. There it is. This one, you need to go to your SQL server and create a table named family. And in your family table, you're going to have a few columns like first name, last name, type of relationship to you, hometown, age, whatever you want in your family table. Then you're going to add some data to the table, and then we want to display it in a data grid. And see if we can select just a certain value out of that table. You know, I think I'm just gonna show you how to do this one real quick. Let's try it. We've got our auto app, so let's create a data grid. I'll show you the easy way. How would that be? Whenever we're working with data, it is our main purpose in life. So we do have a lot of different tools available. So the data grid control is one that'll connect to a data source that we've created. Let's create a new project. And I want a Windows Forms project this time. And I'm going to name it Chapter 21 Data Grid Test. Now, in my data grid, I'm going to put a toolbar up at the top, and I'll show you why later. So let's find our tool strip, put one on there. And then I want data. So I want this form to just be filled up with all of the inventory that we have. So I'm going to use a tool called a data sources. So on your view menu, we want to find data sources. And it looks like you might have to go down to other windows. And it's at the very top of other windows, data sources. Now, when you find the data sources window, you're going to have the add new data source option. So click on that. And we want to use a database. So I'm going to click next. And we want a data set, which will be the result of our SQL command. And now we have to tell the data source manager configuration wizard about our connection. So I'm going to click new connection. And we use SQL Server.
So you go to view, and then you go to other windows, and there's one labeled data source. Other windows, you're just below it. Okay.
Do you see it?
Not there yet. There you go. And then you're practically on data sources. There you go.
And then we want new data source, database.
Presumably. I don't know why you would pick the other ones, but presumably there's a reason for it.
Data set next. And then new connection. Now we want SQL Server Oops, I picked SQL Server database file. That is not the correct one. We want just Microsoft SQL Server. And I'm going to click continue. Now, in our server name is where we want to paste our long server name.
So it seems to me that what Visual Studio is effectively doing for us is probably setting up a little file somewhere that has our server name and our login data. Kind of like I suggested earlier, can we assign that to a string so we can, to a string variable? It's just kind of doing that for us right now, isn't it? So we can just plug it in there. And
Yes,
it is.
Yeah.
And then if we need to go and edit it, it'll just take care of that for us.
Now, once you get that server name in there, we want to change our authentication to SQL Server authentication. And we want to put our username and password in. And here with this connection wizard, not only like Seth is saying, is it keeping this information behind the scenes for us, like hidden like we want, but it's also going to allow us to check and make sure our connection works. So as soon as I type in my password, I'm going to save it.
So it's both more secure because it's hidden, and it's also more convenient because we just don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right. Now, once you've got your connection information and your login information, you should be able to do the drop down and see all of the different databases that you have access to and select your database. So you know your connection is working because you're already seeing it. Is it working? Seeing some stuff. Oh, in view?
Yeah, view
Other windows?
I can't read that well enough to tell you.
Hang on, let me click OK. And now, one other thing we can do is click Test Connection, and it'll tell you if it passes. And it's saving it. Okay, what do we want to do? Do you want to save that sensitive data? I'm going to say yes for now. But you can tell it's always something that we have to be concerned about. I'll just save that connection string. That name is fine. Okay, now it's gone out to the database and it's pulled in all the information that we have. And so it says you have these tables. I'm going to click to expand the tables, and you should see your customers, inventory, and orders tables. We want the inventory table. Now, we could expand that if we wanted and just select certain columns, but I'd like all of them.
Can we select more than one table that way? Can we
Let's
select more
not
than
yet. Right now, let's just select one.
But it is a possibility.
Uh-huh.
We're just not doing it right now because it's simpler that way.
Mhm. And because our relationships could affect how it perceives you want the data. Okay, so that's just it. We want our inventory. Now, as soon as we finish, we should see this data set, data source over here in our data sources. And we have a couple of options. If you click the drop-down arrow, it will let you choose whether you want this information to be displayed in a data grid view or in a details manner. I'm going to leave mine at data grid view, and then I'm going to drag this table onto my form. Is that one better than all that code? Now, let's run it. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Make it pretty however you want it. Now, the reason I wanted to put this toolbar up at the top is in our assignment, it says that your data grid view should be docked. So I'm going to choose dock in parent container, and you'll see that makes it take up the whole form.
Did that toolbar have all that stuff on it before?
It does now, huh?
It just did
It's
that
actually a
because
new
it's pretty
toolbar that it created. Yes,
witchcraft.
it is, isn't it? Let's run it. So the world is good and you can handle this. Here's our new form. We got all our cars. And with the way this is set up, this toolbar here is actually going to allow us to add a new one at the bottom. My Volkswagen, let's see, my Volkswagen is red and its pet name is VW. How creative am I? I could change existing ones. This Beamer, we're gonna make it be a Saab. Now, when I click the save, when it'll make all those changes to the database. So how does this magic occur? Let's look at the code.
Probably due to a big team of engineers pounding their head against the wall for days and months.
Probably.
So that we wouldn't have to anymore.
Because people were going like, I can't do this.
Probably less I can't do this and more I can't be bothered to do this.
So let's look. We saw that our save code was associated with this save button. So I'm going to double click that save button to go look, take a look at that code. And sure enough, it generated code for us. So that toolbar that it created is called the navigator. And that navigator toolbar has specific information already kind of preloaded. It knows what to do when you want to add an item or change an item or save all your items. So if we looked at this code, let's kind of find the beginning here. Here's the beginning of our form code. There's a save item click and inventory table adapter.fill. So there's not very much code, is there? All the rest of it is happening behind the scenes. Where is that? Well, it's happening in our navigator. So let's click on Inventory Binding Navigator. If you look at the properties for your binding navigator, you can kind of see what kind of things this navigator is concerned about. It says, do this certain thing when they move to the first item and move to the next item. It says, oh, use this when they delete items. All these things are built into this binding navigator. I want to look at this data set real fast. If you go in your Solution Explorer, find this data set. The data set is the same data set as what we created in that console application. It's where all our data is residing. Double click on that. You'll see the details.
It makes sort of almost like a database diagram.
In each of the components of the adapter are sitting over here. So we saw in our code that there was one line of code that said table adapter.fill. Well, right here is where it's finding that information. So in this fill event, we actually have a command here that says, I'm going to double click on it, and then I'm going to click the ellipsis so I can get into the SQL editor to actually see what it says. And then we can find the SQL that's running. It just says select car ID, make, color, pet name from inventory. I could, using this query builder, execute the query and make sure that I get stuff back. So when we do magic and we drag that data source onto our form, it creates that binding navigator. The binding navigator is associated with our table adapter. Our table adapter has SQL commands. In Visual Studio, if we look at an SQL command, we can find the query builder, and the query builder will help us modify the SQL command, make it better, change it, do other things. So I think I've given you enough to look at today. We're going to take this table adapter code next time and add an option to only search for a specific car so that we can add that to our family class. So over the weekend, be creating your family table and just be trying to go through the application from the textbook and that chapter, starting to make sense, trying to filter all these things in your brain, sorting them and categorizing them into the different areas so that they can be reasonable to you. Questions?
I need to just sit in the corner and roll on this.
Is it possible to use like a MySQL database?
Yes.
Or, like,
Very good. Yeah. So in this application that we just created with our data source, you would just change your connection string to connect to your MySQL data source.
Whenever you do like a connection, it says data sources. There's something that says MySQL, but you have the other one.
Maybe, or you might have to download that provider. So sometimes you have to Google, MySQL connection string and see if you have to download anything to add that capability, but it should be pretty simple once you do.
Is that all we got?
That is it. Thank you.